All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, we are going to try and dismantle one of the most stubborn ideas in all of Western philosophy. It's really just a simple metaphor, but it's one that has trapped our understanding of consciousness for centuries, and that's the idea of the mind as a box. We're going to see how Edmund Husserl, building on the work of his teacher, Franz Brentano, finally broke it wide open. So let's start with this idea. It's been haunting philosophy since Descartes, really, though. You can trace it back even further. It's this picture of the mind as an inner space, right? A totally self-enclosed box that holds all our thoughts and feelings completely separate from the outer world. It seems pretty intuitive, it feels like common sense, but this simple metaphor creates a absolutely monumental problem. And there it is. That's the great problem of modern epistemology, what we often call the Cartesian problem. If our consciousness is just trapped inside our skulls, how can we ever be sure that our thoughts, our little inner pictures, actually match up with reality out there? How do we possibly bridge that gap? For centuries, this question led to all sorts of incredibly complex theories, but Husserl came to believe they were all trying to solve a problem that was based on a fundamental mistake from the get-go. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace the story of how philosophy tried to break out of this very box. We'll start by really digging into the mistake itself. Then we'll look at a crucial clue that was rediscovered by Husserl's teacher, Franz Brentano. We'll see how Husserl took that clue and made a truly radical breakthrough, completely unboxing consciousness, and in doing so, giving philosophy a brand new task. Okay, let's dive in. First things first, we really need to get a handle on the depth of the problem Husserl was dealing with. This wasn't just some casual analogy. This spatial model of consciousness, this inner realm versus an outer world, was, and in some ways still is, deeply baked into how we think. So this traditional view literally thinks about the mind-world relationship in spatial terms, and that's what creates this gap that seems impossible to cross. It treats consciousness like it's a place, a kind of container. And, well, if it's a container, then by definition, the world has to be outside of it. This sets up that classic subject-object split that modern philosophy has been wrestling with for hundreds of years. And here's Husserl himself just laying out the dilemma perfectly. He's asking, look, if my thinking and my feeling and my perceiving are all just events happening inside this box, how can they possibly mean anything about the world outside? How can an internal event ever truly get a hold of an external reality? This is the knot that he was determined to untie. So, to solve this, Husserl didn't just invent some new concept out of thin air. He turned back to his teacher, Franz Brentano, who had dug up this powerful but mostly forgotten concept from medieval scholastic philosophy. And that concept was intentionality. This is the absolute key. Consciousness isn't some box that's just preoccupied with its own contents. By its very nature, it's directed outward. My thinking is always thinking of something. My wanting is always wanting of something. My seeing is always seeing of something. Consciousness is fundamentally defined by this aboutness, this way it always points beyond itself. Now, what Brentano called this is pretty interesting. He used the term intentional inexistence. The idea was that the object of your thought, let's say you're thinking about a tree, that tree exists within the mental act itself. The tree isn't some separate picture floating around in your mind. The aboutness of the tree is an inseparable feature of the act of thinking about it. Now, this was a brilliant move. It made world-directedness essential to the mind. But notice the wording. Includes something as object within itself. For Husserl, this was still a little too close to that old container model. Yeah, it explained how our thoughts are about things, but it didn't fully explain how they reach the actual things themselves out there in the world. It kind of risked making the object just another piece of furniture inside the mental box. And this brings us right to Husserl's big moment. He took Brentano's clue about intentionality and made a radical leap that just shatters the box entirely. He realized the problem wasn't figuring out how to build a bridge from the mind to the world, but questioning the very idea that there were two separate things that needed a bridge in the first place. He basically argued that this whole philosophical tradition of sticking things between us and the world, things like sense data or representations, or even Brentano's immanent objects, was a huge mistake. These intermediaries are what create the problem. Husserl's move was to just get rid of them, all of them. And right here, this is the core of his breakthrough. For Husserl, it's just absurd to say that the apple I'm thinking about is somehow different from the actual apple. When I perceive the apple on the table, my consciousness isn't aimed at some mental picture of an apple, which I then have to magically match up with the real thing. No, my consciousness is aimed directly at the apple itself, the very one on the table. And this comparison just illustrates the whole paradigm shift perfectly. The old model, it creates this impossible gap, that big question mark in the middle. Husserl's model, it just dissolves the gap. Consciousness isn't a container holding a picture of the world. Consciousness is our direct, world-disclosing openness. It's not a thing, it's an activity, a direct engagement. Okay, so that's a pretty radical claim, right? How did Husserl justify it? How could he be so confident in just tossing out centuries of philosophy and getting rid of the box? Well, he did it by showing that the main alternative, trying to explain our connection to the world through cause and effect, it just completely falls apart when you look at it closely. Just think about it for a second. If we say causality connects us to the world, okay, so when you look at a distant hill, what are you actually perceiving? Is it the hill or the light photons hitting your retina? Causality can't really tell the difference. Or think about a suitcase. The physical object is the same, but you can see it as a piece of luggage, a symbol of your vacation, or a container for your clothes. The cause is the same, but the meaning changes completely. Causality can't explain that. And the real kicker, what about thinking of things that don't exist, like unicorns? Nothing is causing that thought, but your mind is clearly and intentionally directed toward an object. So the big takeaway here is that we have to stop thinking of the mind as a place. Instead, phenomenology redefines it as a process, an activity. To be conscious is to be engaged with a world. This world-relatedness isn't something that gets tacked on later. It's part of the very fabric of consciousness itself. The world is never outside the mind, because the mind's very being is to be in and of the world. This breakthrough just completely changes the game. If consciousness isn't a box, then the primary job of modern philosophy for the last few hundred years, figuring out how to get out of the box, is suddenly obsolete. This is such a crucial shift to understand. Husserl isn't offering a new, better solution to the problem of the external world. He is dissolving the problem itself. He's showing that the entire mind in a box setup was based on a flawed, spatial metaphor right from the beginning. Philosophy took a wrong turn, and phenomenology's job is to get us back on the right path. So the new task for philosophy isn't to study a worldless subject, trying to figure out how it can access a mindless object. No, the task is to describe this inseparable connection. We study our conscious acts, perceiving, remembering, imagining, precisely because it's through these very acts that a world appears to us with all the meaning and structure that it has. And this leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on, one that we'll dive into next time. If consciousness and the world aren't two separate things, but are internally, fundamentally related, what does that do to our common sense idea of a world that exists completely independent of any mind at all? This question is going to lead us straight into one of Husserl's most famous and most difficult ideas, the phenomenological reduction.